Yes, I gotta have faith. I gotta have
You're listening to Faith at Work, brought to you by LymeRevive.org. Information and healing for Lyme disease. Now to our host, Carl Grant.
Welcome to Faith at Work. I'm Carl Grant, here with Brad Phillips, Director of Emerging Company Services at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thanks for joining us, Brad.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Brad, tell our listeners a little bit about your career and your work life.
Yeah, so long story short, I've had a good number of stops, but after I got out of graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, I went with was on the advisory side of a Big Four consulting firm, and then eventually, in the mid to late 90s, went into technology sales here in this market. That was pretty turbulent. The companies I was with were internet/telecom, and there was a lot of consolidation. There was just a lot of things going on, and I worked pretty much with the same team, and we had some 2-year stints, and then decided to go out and try to start our own thing. So there were a couple of companies, the last of which was a search firm that focused on placing sales and marketing people at mostly emerging technology companies. And did that for 8 or 10 years, and then ultimately came here to PwC. And for PwC, I basically scan the region and find companies that we think have exceptional potential and bring them to the attention of my partners here. And we just kind of rally around and figure out ways that we can help them. And typically that looks like mentoring or introduction to capital resources, venture capital and private equity firms, and just general coaching. Having been in a startup previously, I understand how difficult it can be, and it's just a very rewarding position to be in.
Yeah, you've got my old job there, Brad.
I do.
Big shoes to fill there. Huh? So how did that work out, going from you guys were doing internet sales back in the heyday to headhunting? That seems like quite a transition from selling.
It's a very, very interesting transition. So as I mentioned, we got tired of our 2-year stints. So ultimately what we did is we started a consulting company that helped other firms in businesses that they hadn't been in before. An example, we had one client that was a carrier colo provider, and they wanted to understand how to basically create a company with managed services. So we did a study for them and presented it to them and said, and by the way, the sales folks that you have right now are not going to know what they need to in order for them to sell this. So you need to go hire a couple, and we know of a few. So then we started thinking, wow, with our network, we could really make some waves in this industry in placing pretty much sales engineering people, some marketing, but that's where our network was. And a lot of these people that we at the start that we placed, we had seen them perform in person. So we were able to scale that company pretty quickly.
So ever since I've known you, Brad, I've known you as a person of faith, but I don't know where that started. Where did you come to faith?
Yeah, sure. It's not a story nearly as cool as yours. It's a nice story, but they're not gonna make a movie out of it. So all of my family removed from years and years is down from the Shenandoah Valley area, Harrisonburg area. And we moved up here when I was a baby, and I was brought up in a Christian household. We went to church and Sunday school every Sunday, but I started developing my personal relationship with Christ probably in my late 20s or early 30s. And a lot of that was, we all go through stressful times, and I was in a couple of difficult job situations. right? So that led me to fall back on my faith. And since that point, I've been trying to continue to step forward each and every year. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but they kind of culminated. And now most of the stuff that I do from a charitable standpoint has been around the churches that I have attended. So I ran missions for about 8 years at a church where we did a lot of work in Africa and so forth. So it's a really good story, and I would say that there has been bumps. Of course, when I was in college, I never stopped believing, but it was a little more difficult, or maybe I should say inconvenient, to keep up the weekly schedule at church. You know, I was in a fraternity in college, if you're out till 1, you're not going to look for a church to go to the next morning. So that was a phase. Thankfully, I went through that, and my parents were wonderful. They didn't push me on it, and I got through that period, and then I realized how important it was to do those things, and now I'm here.
So you say you go to church on Sunday. You're active with the church. Is that something that ends on Sunday at noon, or do you bring that to work with you when you go to work on Monday? And if you do, what does that look like, and what's it look like throughout your work life?
Yeah. So you've probably heard the saying that you may be the only Bible that somebody reads today. So I'm really open about my faith at work. I don't come in on Monday morning and announce the sermon that I heard yesterday, but you can live your faith in many ways through work. One of them is empathy. For example, if I encounter a colleague that's going through a difficult time, I'll typically say I'll be thinking about and praying for you. Right. And no matter what somebody's background is, I've never had somebody say, no, don't do that.
Yeah, that's true. Atheists even take prayer, don't they?
Right. So it's, I think the empathy part is key. There's been other opportunities. For instance, when we were running our search firm, I had on my calendar that I was going to go see a Christian speaker. And one of my employees walked by, and it had popped up on my screen, and she saw it, and she was familiar with that individual, and then brought it up to me later. There's also been places where I have, with a colleague, I've, as a gift, brought a Bible and been very clear about saying, look, this isn't from the company, this is a personal gift, and I hope you enjoy it, sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that you can do. As you know, I've worked with you for 15 years or so on the High Tech Prayer Breakfast. And when that time comes up, I reach out to people and I let them know that, it's an event where we draw 800 people, and ask if they would like to join. And then sometimes before and sometimes after, people ask detailed questions about, that next step.
Yeah. And recently you gave a personal testimony at one of the prayer breakfast meetings about a struggle you've had with fear. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about that with us today.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm kind of an open book on that stuff. My attitude is if I go through this stuff, there better be something good to come of it. So I actually enjoy sharing that. So as a child, I suffered from fear, and not of heights or the boogeyman or anything like that, but of the unknown. So I would get all worked up before the night before the first day of school, even though I had been going to that school for years. That then kind of involved when I got into college. I remember it being the first week and being overwhelmed and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna flunk out and I'm never gonna get a job. And that motivated me. I did well. And then, back then, unfortunately, if somebody asked me, I'd say, I am fearful of this, and it's a good thing because look at the results. I got a 3.5 or, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And that was the same case when, with work. And work, it took a little bit of a different tune. It was more not wanting to let somebody down, whether, it was my wife or who I reported to, not wanting to let the team down, that sort of thing. So it's something that I've been working on pretty much all my life. I'm in a pretty good place with it now, but it's been a rocky road.
How did you overcome it, though? I'm sure a lot of our listeners have the same thing that they're dealing with, right? I dealt with that at a point in my life, and I'm just, what advice do you have for somebody who's fearful of losing their job every day, fearful of flunking out of school or whatever it may be, losing their relationship with somebody? How do you get over that?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. I don't think there's one silver bullet, but the first thing you can do is get in the Word, research, and find out what the Bible says about fear. Back when I was going through this, and by the way, I'm not immune to it now. I still, I have 2 teenagers. I still have it now, but it's. Let me figure out the best way to say this. It's you get into the Word. I would also invite people to look back at other things in the past that they were fearful from. And in most cases, 90% of the things that they were worried about did not happen. There's actually a famous quote around that. And I think it helps to get in the Word and to do that. And also to be honest about your fears when you're in prayer. I found that to be very helpful.
And so it's a daily process. You're still working through it to this day, and lifting these fears up before the Lord and bringing them into the Word, or have you conquered it altogether?
Oh no, I don't think you conquer something like that. The funny thing is I thought when early on in my career when I was going through it that I was the only one. What I've learned since then is that fear is rampant, and if you're at a table with 10 people, and if you don't have fear, the other 9 do. I mean, it's a high percentage of people just because of the way the world is nowadays. And to be honest with you, one of the reasons I like to share my experiences is I don't, life's pretty demanding, and I don't understand how people make it through that don't have a strong faith. I pray for people like that because I think it would be very, very difficult to approach some of the things that you need to as a business person, as a father and a husband, and not have that faith to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. I remember a time when I was dealing with the fear of man and things like that. And I remember one of our fellow prayer breakfast colleagues came up to me, and this is a man who has had HIV since the mid 80s. And I just remember looking at me in my eyes, and he said, "Oh, man of fear." And it just sent chills through my spine, knowing that this guy, has been walking with a death sentence for all these years and yet walks without fear. So, that I think that one scared me out of that for lack of a better phrase. But we're coming up here on the end. So I'm here with Brad Phillips, Director of Emerging Company Services at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I'm Carl Grant. And we want to welcome you to follow us on Facebook at Faith at Work Radio. So www.facebook.com/Faith at Work Radio. Thanks so much, Brad.
Thanks for the time. Yep.
Yes, I gotta have faith.
You have been listening to Faith at Work with Carl Grant, brought to you by LimeRevive.org.